and possibilities? And what about curious about what others are up to on the planet when it comes to pleasure, sex, and play? Have you considered what pleasure can do for your life, your body, and your bank account? Do you know something magical, delightful, and out-of-this-world orgasmic is not only possible for you, but totally available to you? If you're ready to be the magical, sexual, sexy beast you know you can be, and you just need the tools to get there, you're in the right place. Now, here's the host of The Pleasure Zone, sensual movement artist, relationship and sex alchemist, Milica Jelenic.
Or maybe you are actually a practitioner, practicer of dangerous kinks. In all of the things that I'm talking about today on this particular episode, but always, my number one thing is consent. So no matter what we're talking about here, even though it may sound dangerous or outrageous or something that is not consensual, all of this is consensual. There is something called consensual non-consent, where it can appear that there's no consent happening. However, the consent is there. And it generally has been either spoken about and sometimes even contracts signed. So today's conversation is not for the weak-hearted or the faint of heart or anybody who gets grossed out easily. This is a pretty deep conversation about dangerous kinks, and kinks in general. Life in general is dangerous. You know, you could just die walking out onto the street, right? So in general, anything can be dangerous, but these are ones that actually put, you know, they're at that level of danger where your likelihood of being hurt or dying is a lot higher because it's risky behavior. So we're talking about seriously risky behavior. And again, all of this behavior is stuff where, when I'm talking about it, that there has been consent about all of these activities. So how do they become dangerous if there is consent? And how do I know this, and why do I know any of this? Well, I'm a sex and intimacy coach, and I also work with people as a holistic health practitioner. And in my practice, I come across a lot of different things and a lot of different people with a lot of different lifestyles. And I've also had a massive curiosity for a number of years, since probably I was 12 years old, about human sexuality. Just curious and more curious about, what do people do? How do they have pleasure? I didn't even understand the scope of sexuality probably until the last 25 years. I didn't even understand anything about kink, although I do remember somewhere maybe when I was a teenager, around between the ages of 17 and 19, I remember having a guy who was interested in me. So I think I was 17. Have a conversation about tying me up to a bed, and I was mortified. This is back in the day when, you know, people would get on phones and have phone conversations, and the conversation was really uncomfortable for me. For one, I didn't even understand the world of kink, so all I could grasp in my head was that I felt like this person wanted to harm me. So, and I know now that that wasn't actually the case. It was totally a kink, but that was not even my scope of understanding or reality. Did not understand that that could be pleasurable, didn't understand the value of it, and I absolutely didn't try it out at that age. It was not even close to my reality. So it was a very it was definitely interesting to learn about, and it's a conversation that to this day, when I remember it, I can remember exactly where I was, what kind of the weather was outside, what I was looking at on my wall, I remember all of it because it was so vivid and visceral, and the conversation was so shocking for me. Just the conversation was shocking, never mind the action. So, for a lot of people, I can understand that these topics are going to be shocking. And this isn't just your normal, I'm going to tie you up to a bed, let's have some fun in a consensually fun way. These, and we are talking consent here, but these are more dangerous acts that could lead to death. So people who are interested in kind of taking it to that edge of, you know, possibly dying through kink play have aphilia. Philias are things that we're attracted to, called autoassassinophilia. So many S's. Autoassassinophilia. Autoassassinophilia. Lots of S's. 4 S's in that word. So if that is something that you really get turned on by, being taken to that edge of life and death, which is a really big for thrill seekers, right? So, you know, people who are into thrill seeking, like jumping out of planes or, you know, shooting apples off of each other's heads or something, that is super thrill seeking. Now, for people who get turned on by that, like if you're jumping out of planes and you're not just having the adrenaline rush, but you're actually turned on, sexually stimulated by jumping out of an airplane, not knowing whether your parachute's going to open or not, that edge of death experience, then this is probably a kind of episode that's for you. We are going to talk about some things that would be considered gory. So I do want to give you a heads up on things that are gory, and some things that people will probably consider quite vile. This episode is absolutely for 18 plus. This is not for anybody to just like listen to with their children on in the background. No. And listen, you know, don't listen to it necessarily in a public space where people are going to be freaked out by what they're hearing. So being respectful of others, because as much as there's consent in the play, there also needs to be consent to even listen to this kind of conversation. So I'm giving you a very heads up warning. This is going to be probably an episode that you might find my most vile, maybe most violent, maybe most peculiar episode I've ever done. Although I do talk about kinks a lot, this one is going to be talking about things that I have kind of touched on, and then there are some things that I have never talked about because they are absolutely on the edge of dangerous. So we're going to start with one that was actually the inspiration for this show. And the inspiration for this show came from me and my absolute love of murder mystery shows. So I was watching the series called Brokenwood series, and it was around season 7 of Brokenwood, which is on Acorn. It is a series from New Zealand. And in this episode, there's a character who gets a Spanish Inquisition garrote. And for fun, he likes to test out different torture devices. And he's kind of kinky with torture devices. And the question is like, how does this character end up dying? So it's no surprise the character dies. And so they're using the Spanish Inquisition garrote. And if you've ever seen one of these things, it's basically like a chair with a high back on it, and there's a screw that goes through the back of the chair. So the person's leaning against it, and their head is clamped on by the neck, and they're also bound. Their arms are bound so they can't escape. So you're bound in different positions and probably bound at the feet as well, completely tied down, while a screw gets screwed into the back of your neck. So you either die by your neck snapping or impact, just excessive. Or that's what into your head. So this particular kind of play would be highly dangerous. Using anything that's, ancient torture devices, hugely dangerous, and absolutely require you to have consent. And in cases of using something like medieval torture devices or Spanish Inquisition torture devices in your kink play, I would also recommend that you have papers written out by agreement that you agreed to participate in this kind of play, because it can go so wrong so fast. And it can be safe, but you never know. These devices can be highly dangerous for, people who have a kink about maybe playing, as much as there's the garrote, which is like choking, there's also the guillotine. And if you are turned on by the thought of narrowly escaping a guillotine, you could get your head chopped off. So you can see how some of these things are so on the edge that they are, just even talking about them probably get some people freaked out and scared. So anything to do with asphyxiation or choking of any kind are highly dangerous activities. So there's different ways that choking takes place, where sometimes there's just hands involved. And usually when there's hands involved, the person will put pressure right near the windpipe to try and to cut off the wind. Super dangerous, especially because when you're being choked, you're not necessarily able to give your safe words. So you need to have another way to indicate whether you feel safe or not. And if you can't say them, the person by all means could say, well, you didn't say it. Well, you can't say it, you're choking. So in those cases, you need to have like a safe action, whether that's like pinching the person, hitting them, tapping out like you do in martial arts, like tapping out on the floor, tapping out on your partner. Tapping out is a great safe action. When you can't use a safe word, it's good to use a safe action. So under the umbrella of things to do with asphyxiation, it can be autoerotic asphyxiation, which we've talked about. That's where you self-choke. Sometimes people will hang themselves from things and while they're masturbating, or they just find the asphyxiation, the lightheadedness in the asphyxiation to be a big turn on. So if you are doing autoerotic asphyxiation and you don't have somebody there to take you off of whatever device you're using for choking, it's super dangerous. When you start to lose consciousness, you can't necessarily cut yourself off of a rope, and you can't necessarily stop yourself from whatever method you're using for the asphyxiation, because you could end up actually hanging yourself. And there are a number of incidents where people have hung themselves to death via autoerotic asphyxiation play. And it's one of the things that I remember it was either an episode of Geraldo back in the day, or it was one of those talk shows from like the late 80s, early 90s, where there were parents that had come on who had found their teenagers in closets, usually, who had suffocated themselves to death using ropes or different devices and they found their teenagers basically naked with ropes around their neck, obviously mortified at finding that. So it happens enough that we need to be smart and need to be safe. So if you are doing any kind of play that involves suffocation, it would be really good and really smart to have implements around you that you can cut things off. Use something that has Velcro so you could easily like undo yourself. if you're doing this by yourself. Or don't do it by yourself and just have somebody there safely for you to untie you or undo you. That can be safer, although if anything goes wrong, then they're liable. So again, there's huge risk, not just, there's not just like the person could go to jail, but you could lose your life. So anything and everything to do with choking is hugely dangerous. Even though it's really popular these days, doesn't mean that it's not dangerous. So we're going to move on to another topic, but first we're going to head to another topic of this. We're still staying within the super dangerous kinks, but we'll move on to another little segment. So you're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email. info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. There are a whole bunch of kinks in the world that are just highly, highly dangerous. They're dangerous not just because of what, the nature of you can die from anything, which is truly a fact. You could pretty much die just sitting on your toilet at times, but these are intentionally dangerous and they are for thrill seekers. So the first ones we were talking about involve asphyxiation, which means that you're choking or not breathing and you can lose breath. A nicer, fun way of calling it is breath play. However, the technical terms are erotic asphyxiation when you're doing that to somebody else, and autoerotic asphyxiation when you're doing it to yourself. So you could be choking with different things like a scarf, a rope. You could use a belt, or you could even be using implements from the Spanish Inquisition, like a garrote. Now, there are a lot of different torture tools. For those of you who are like highly interested in torture tools, you can look up, medieval England torture tools, Spanish Inquisition torture tools. There are torture tools that have been used for actual torture to people who, were accused of things, and they have been brought into the modern world as devices for kink play. So things like garrots are now being used for kink play, and some of the other torture devices, like a St. John's cross, where you're in a position with your arms up and your legs spread and you're tied in an X position. If your arms are elevated for long enough, you can actually end up having a heart attack. So that's also dangerous. These are actually, now that I think about it, a lot of my references for today are coming from episodes of shows that I have watched that are on murder mysteries. And sometimes my first thought is, that's going to be a kink. And then it doesn't end up being a kink. But there have been occasions where on murder mystery shows, I am right and it's a kink. And it's like, oh, and I always love when my mom or my husband will look over at me and go, what? That's not. I'm like, yes, it's a kink, got it. And when I'm right, I feel so gratified. So there are a lot of kinks that can land you in a whole pile of danger. Like even things, so we're talking about asphyxiation and asphyxiation through things like choking. There's also asphyxiation through things like drowning. So being waterboarded or having your head held underwater for whatever reason, or having water poured into your mouth excessively, or having somebody urinate in your mouth, where you may be choking on that. There is a point where the choking can come from different methods, whether it's through having something impact you externally, like a rope, or internally, like you're drowning. Either way, those are types of asphyxiation. So I also mentioned some old torture methods in bringing, things like garrots in, but also there are other torture methods too. There are some really interesting things like Iron Maidens. There are stretch tables, and those stretch tables still sometimes are being used for kink play, right? So that you would wind or unwind it where the person's body would start to crack and stretch. I think a modern version of that is like an inversion table. However, inversion tables aren't dangerous as dangerous. I suppose they can be for some people. As dangerous if you were on a table that's stretching you mechanically through different pulls, like different methods of being pulled apart. So yeah, wild and interesting stuff. So if these things like turn you on like crazy, I get it. You probably love a good adrenaline rush, and you probably love being on the edge of life and death. And that is absolutely like valid. You're not harming anybody. You could potentially be harming yourself. So I'm just doing this show to give you some information and insight on how to be safe with these things. So if you are into erotic play, asphyxiation play, and you are, you like using different implements to be choked, having something that will help you release that is really important. Like whether you have surgical scissors to cut a rope, or whatever you've got on you, like around your neck, you have something that can cut that really fast and easy. Or if you are doing anything where maybe your hands are tied, like I was talking about the St. John's cross, you'd also want to have implements that can cut and release from there, or that you have buckles that are easy release buckles. So sometimes you get that as well, or sometimes there's Velcro, so you can have easy release. It is important to always be playing with consent, always. Both verbal and, I would go for these ones, extreme ones, written consent as well. So have something written somewhere so that nobody's getting in trouble. So once you got your consent and you've got your safe words, communication, really important. Find out ways that you can communicate if you are being choked, and you need to be able to indicate that you want to stop, you want to have a safe action rather than a safe word, because you might not be able to talk. So tapping out, like in martial arts, or doing a tug or a pinch, so that the person is aware that that is you giving your safe action. So those are really, really, can't stress how important those are for safety for the person who's receiving it and for the person who's giving that. Because if you are caught in a position where you've choked somebody and you didn't stop, even when you've, have your written consent and everything like that, I mean, that can help to know that there was play involved. However, you kill somebody, you've killed somebody. So you need to be smart and be safe. So I was talking about, how it's not, if you have your hands up in the air for an extended period of time, and I can't remember the amount of time. It's like, I think it's half an hour or an hour. Maybe it's a couple of hours. But if you are hanging on like a St. John's cross or any kind of implement that's got your arms up in the air, above you, outstretched, kind of like Jesus on a cross pose, but a little bit even higher, and your legs are also spread, you can end up in a lot it can cause a lot of stress on your heart. So to the point where you can have a heart attack. So you want to be able to time those things too, and not to put yourself up in something or have somebody put you up in there and then walk away from you. You want to make sure you're being observed. You want to make sure your safe words are understood and that you practice and try those out even. So give a little 5-minute tryout and give your safe word, and then go for as long as you want. But I would do your safe word with one hand before I go with two. And I would not do this play with somebody that you just met on the street. Even if you're walking into a professional who does this kind of play for a living, you want to have not only a conversation beforehand, you want to be, I would say you'd want to have a very thorough understanding examination to make sure that you're both mentally fit, physically fit, that you can take this kind of activity, because it can be physically draining. It's highly stressful on the body. So you want to make sure that your body can handle it. So I personally would not do that play with somebody just off the street, or it's just because I would not want to be liable for their life. And I don't know that I could trust that they're not walking into my hands and lying to me about their health or any situation that, or that they could honor their own safe word and actually give that when it's required. So I personally wouldn't do that. So we've got things that can cause heart attacks, things that can cause asphyxiation. There are also different things that people ingest that can cause harm and death. I'm sure I could do like 3 episodes on these dangerous kinks, but I'm giving you some that I've maybe never talked about, as in like the heart attack situation, or Spanish Inquisition implements of torture. Those probably haven't brought those up much, maybe randomly. One of the things that I am going to be talking about, and I want to give a fair warning on this one, in the next segment, I'm going to be talking about there is like bloodlust play, where people like to either drink blood or bloodlet. So we will be talking about that too, just a heads up. And there's also poison play. So some people like to take it on the edge and play with poisons. So that can also be dangerous, not as maybe frightening or gross to talk about, as some people may find it really gross to talk about blood situations. Those we will be talking about in this next segment. So I really wanted to give you guys a heads up on that. So some key things to remember. Again, have your safe words and test. You can always test these things out for like 30 seconds or a minute and see how you feel. And if you're doing this with somebody that you feel safe with, but hopefully it's somebody you trust and they honor your safe word, and you're like, okay, I can do a minute, and then next time maybe it'll be 2 minutes. It is something you can build up. It's It's like you don't just jump in and run a 100-meter dash with no training and just think you're going to end up in the Olympics. Although we found out this year that you can be an Olympian even if you just say you do breakdancing. So, and apparently you can just go into swimming as long as you trained for 6 months in some hotel pool. So I don't recommend that. It doesn't come out very good, does it? So actually build your resistance and resilience and trust by doing little bits at a time, having those safe words, having consent, having all of that in place. So we're going to talk about some of the more gory stuff, the blood stuff, after this commercial break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and I'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Interested in masturbating for money, copulating for consciousness, and pleasuring on purpose? 21 Days of Sexual Magicism with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic is an exploration of tools, processes, and actions that you can use to create more for your life, your body, your money inflows, and so much more. Graduated learning for all levels of interest. Learn at your own pace via video classes or join the yearly live class. Take a peek at www.milicajelenic.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight we are talking about some of the more dangerous, or the most dangerous kinks that I can actually talk about, because there are some that I probably can't even talk about because the conversation will be banned. So I'm trying to talk about the most dangerous ones and still have this episode be available for people for educational purposes, so that you know that if you are into these kinks, what you need to do, or if you've been curious about them and not really know how to get going with them. I highly recommend not going from zero to hero. So if you've never done kink play before, don't just go into some kind of choking play right off the bat. Maybe start with something little, like making sure that you can undo hand ropes, or learning something that's a little bit more learning and playing with something that's a little bit less of I would say, like an Olympic athletic style sex play. Like, this is Olympic level. When we're talking about these kinds of things, not only do you need to be super present and aware with your body to know when, if you're the one receiving it, to know when the point of danger has hit. And also whoever it is that is with you, for them to be able to read that in you too, in case you can't give the signs. So it takes full awareness, full presence, full communication, full consent, and a lot of awareness. So practice the things that are less dangerous. And then if you are to this point of building things up, this, you may already be aware of this stuff, but also this is for educational purposes, so that you know that this is out there in case you have concern for somebody and you think they're, if they're coming to work all the time with bruises around their neck and they're not saying anything, there could be abuse that's happening, or there could be consensual play happening. There's always ways to open those conversations if you're worried about somebody. Maybe that would be, if you are worried about somebody and you want to get on a call to figure out how you can connect with me through my website. So from now until the end of December, so 2024, you will be able to still get a 30-minute call with me. And until that's going to be the last dates, you're going to be able to get them for free. I've been offering this for 10 years. So those of you who have gotten in on those calls have been lucky. But at the end of this year, I will no longer be offering the free calls. All right, so moving right along, we're going to move into the blood fetish. And just to keep it simple, we're just going to call it the blood fetish, because sometimes it's called, it's like hemophilia, but that's also like hemophilia. There's also wow, I can't even say that one today. Hematolagnia. I'm probably saying that really terribly. If anybody out there is Greek, I apologize for my pronunciation, because I know that one was terrible. So part of the blood fetish is often for people who are kind of into vampiric play. So there used to be a place in Toronto when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s that always heard rumors that people, they were like vampire goth clubs. And I went to vampire goth clubs in the 90s, but I never saw anybody drinking blood. But apparently there were some that they were like back rooms, and this was the kind of play that was going on. So one of the dangers of this kind of play, like vampire play, is that you could be bloodletting somebody until they completely bleed out and die. And it can be kind of, well, it can be extremely dangerous depending on where the cuts and the bleeding are taking place. Also, we do carry infections in our blood. So if you have an infection and you're drinking it, say, for example, HIV or AIDS, and you're drinking somebody's blood with HIV or AIDS, that is not a safe thing to do. And there are also fetishes of drinking blood, but it's a way safer version of drinking blood. So if you're actually giving oral sex to somebody who's bleeding through menstruation, then that's going to be a lot safer than biting them and bleeding them through biting their neck, or cutting their neck, or cutting their arm or something and sucking the blood. Way more dangerous to do that. Of course, the blood from menstruation can also carry infection and different things. So yeah, it's important that it's healthy blood. But if you are going to do the blood play, I would go with anything to do with menstrual blood, because it's just easier and safer than trying to do any other kind of blood. So why would people do this to begin with, right? There's, like, going back centuries, there has been stuff connected with blood, as blood is magic, as there's been blood sacrifices. There are all kinds of blood sacrifices in the Bible. So if somebody's listening to this and they're like super Christian and they think I'm disgusting and wrong, there are blood sacrifices in the Bible, guys. So, they sacrifice lambs and put their blood around doors. There's all kinds of other blood sacrifices that happened killing of animals and draining their blood. It's all part of it. So that's on a different, variation. However, it's all a blood sacrifice. So blood is in itself, by many, many cultures, considered to be super powerful and have magical properties. So a lot of times the attraction to blood play is also on the kind of spectrum of playing with all things deep magic. I'm going to call it deep magic. People call it dark magic, but I think it's just a different level. And there is stuff that goes on that could be called evil for sure. But when we're talking about somebody giving oral sex to somebody who's menstruating, I don't think that's necessarily evil. Would it be my shtick? Not necessarily, but don't knock it till you try it, I suppose. And also, for some people, it may be highly healing. And so I haven't had the experience, so I can't really say. So why would people be aroused by that? I would think that whenever I've watched vampire movies, I've always watched them, they get highly aroused by the vampires are super aroused by sucking blood from somebody. They wake up, they're more alive. There's something about it. There's life force energy in there. You can probably feel somebody's heart beating faster as there's an imminent feeling of death. I think as soon as you start bleeding, most people's brains go to, oh, I could die. Because that stuff that's inside you is now coming outside of you. It doesn't belong on the outside, it belongs on the inside. So it can be scary. It can be quite scary. So that is definitely a dangerous one. And so for some people who also are into self-cutting, not from a place of self-harm, but from a place of arousal, you could take that to another level. It can be, sometimes people do it surely for the attention, but there is the kink involved too, where you could be just cutting yourself and being totally turned on by watching your blood drip, or then licking your own blood. There's any number of things that could be going on if you are into blood play. So I hope I didn't lose half the audience on talking about that. It's really important to be safe with that so you don't unalive anybody while you're doing it. And also really important it's really important for everybody to just be aware when they're doing anything that can be life-threatening, right? Whatever you're doing that could threaten your life, you'd be aware with. So translate that over to any of this kink play. Be super aware. If you were jumping out of a plane, you probably need to be really aware. So same goes for this. If it's on the verge of threatening your life, gives you a huge adrenaline rush, it's always good to have somebody there that can help navigate. Professionally, for sure, that's helpful, or getting guidance or anything like that can be really helpful as well. So the other things that can be, we talked about blood potentially being swallowed, that can be dangerous because of disease, but also because the person could bleed out. There is also the danger of poisons. And there are lots of different ways people have poisoned themselves, or taken even bits of poison over time for building resistance, but also they take poison because they like to feel sick and vomit. So there is a paraphilia connected with sickness and vomiting. And if you're turned on by vomiting in a way that's not the same as somebody who's maybe having an eating disorder, but you're actually sexually aroused by vomiting, watching somebody vomit, or eating your own vomit, or eating somebody else's vomit. Yeah, I really took that to an extreme, but these things exist, guys. So any one of those could definitely create health issues. So vomiting for the reason of also maybe feeling like your body is going into a state of near death, that could also happen. there's poisons that I think we don't necessarily even regard as always as poisons, but some drugs like heroin would be like, I would say, a poison that could take you to the edge of death as well, and highly addictive. So you'd want to go back for more because of the high. So, those things. Definitely stay away from the poisons. If you have a curiosity about poisons, it might be, I don't even know what to say about that one. Not a fan of using poisons. And if it is your body, right? So I can't stop you. I would definitely do research on your poison of choice. Some people like specific poisons. There have been poisons that are hallucinogens. They are banned in some countries. They're available in others. There are different alcohols that are also questionable. They could be considered poisons as well. And then there are actual poisons like taking or drinking things like, any kind of poison. Like if you just want that feeling that you could be on the verge of death, you probably are going to get it if you take poison or are turned on by poison. So that one, and normally I would say, if you're an adult and blah, 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 and you're of consenting age and you've consented, I wouldn't say that for poison because the chances are you don't have the antidote. Even if it's like snake venom and you're turned on by being bitten by a snake and having the venom of a snake in you, you're going to have somebody with the anti-venom right there to stop that reaction. And the chances of that are just so slim that I highly, highly recommend that you avoid that. So we're going to talk about a few more on the edge, not so safe, pretty dangerous kinks that are out there when we come back from this commercial break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone, and we'll be right back.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is the Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight we're talking about some of the most dangerous kinks that I can actually talk about without being banned, because there are many out there that I could talk about and probably get banned, and I'm questioning some of the ones I brought up today, but trying to keep them within the level where I won't get banned. So there are some very, very dangerous kinks out there. But anything can be dangerous, right? So whether it's asphyxiation, autoerotic asphyxiation, there are some really, really dangerous ones like, I think I can say this I'm going to say this and we'll just see what happens. But there are also fetishes and kinks for having your body parts removed from your body. So we'll refer to that as if you have if you have external genitalia that's fairly large, 3 to 5 inches, we'll say, you might, if you happen to be a person who has the fetish of having that appendage removed from your body, ripped off of your body, that is actually a type of fetish. So super dangerous, because you might create a lot of damage, and it can be excruciating, I would think. And sometimes it is just an impulse where it's like you want to be shamed so badly that you want that part of your body to be completely pulled off. So it can often lead to self-castration, super dangerous. Am I gonna be allowed to say that? I hope so, because that one is dangerous, and there's a point where some of these fetishes need to be discussed, because if you have that, I would highly recommend that you talk to somebody who's a professional before you go harming yourself, because you're certainly not going to be able to get your body parts back to working the way they did. So if there is a lot of shame that makes you want to do that, definitely get help on that. There are some other ones that could be dangerous, like like we talked about poison, but we didn't necessarily talk about how those poisons might enter you through, deadly spiders, and I mentioned snakes, but venom is one of the ways that you might have poison enter your body that could be highly dangerous as well. And that one I did mention, not a fan of the total potential death. So if you do have this stuff where you feel really on edge and you feel like you really need to just be able to either talk about it or experience it, just know that if you're feeling a little bit scared of what you're interested in, or maybe you've been watching some stuff on porn because you couldn't quite get to the level of extreme excitement that you were hoping to get to, so you went a next level where now you not only do you want to see blood, but you want to create blood in your own self, so you want to rip off an appendage. That is wild, but also I think it requires some assistance. So as much as it can be kinky sexy for you, it can also be highly damaging. So I would definitely recommend talking to somebody, whether it's for that kind of level of self-devaluation and self-loathing where you want to rip your body parts off. That's not something that I can professionally help you with, but there are professionals out there that can. I would recommend psychiatrists for that. And for somebody who's just going through maybe curiosity about choking, that I can work with you on. But the level of pulling your body parts off, that I'm probably not qualified for. So just letting you know my limits there. So there's some other ones too. Like I remember watching movies about people who get highly turned on by having sex while driving in cars and potentially ending up in car accidents. Again, not the safest maneuver. So if you are turned on by, getting it on in moving vehicles, that is also dangerous and also against the law. So if you do get caught with that and you manage to survive an accident, you probably are not just going in the hospital, but you're probably going to jail. So things to consider. You don't want to land in jail. You definitely want to be consensual. You want to have all your body parts at the end and you want to survive it. I hope that this was both education and enlightening and curiosity, and maybe helps you know whether you need to get some assistance.
Thank you for listening to The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. The Pleasure Zone returns next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain and 5 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by choosing to be turned on and